This podcast is a TransiT production.
Hello, welcome, and thank you for joining us on our first Digital Twins for Decarbonising Transport podcast. In this episode, we introduce the TransiT project. We'll also discuss how transit will benefit consumers and you. But before we get started, I'll introduce our principal investigator of the TransiT Hub, Professor Phil Greening. Could you say a few words about yourself?
Yes, Phil Greening. I'm professor at Heriot-Watt, where I run 3 research centres, and I am the principal investigator for TransiT. My primary interest is decarbonisation of transport.
And I'm Dr. Jamie Blanche. I'm a PDRA at the University of Glasgow, and I'm working on the TransiT project stakeholder engagements and projects aimed at the decarbonisation of our energy systems.
I suppose we'll get to the guts of what is the TransiT Hub and why is it important?
The TransiT Hub is focused on developing digital capabilities to accelerate decarbonisation. And the reason that that's important is that we have been eating into the carbon budget. That's the amount of carbon we can afford to emit before we go past the tipping point. So we've got only about 5 years left of that carbon budget based on current emission levels. So that's compressed the time that we've got to find solutions. Now, in the real world, if you want to evaluate a technology or a system or a new way of doing things, then in transport, that takes about 5 years. So we don't have an opportunity to do it in the real world compared to what we would normally do. Yeah? We need to compress the time. The only way that we can do that is digitally. So in a computer world, we can simulate a year in a matter of minutes. We can therefore evaluate our solutions over many different scenarios in a very short space of time. And we can use that information to direct our real world trials. So what we're doing in the first case is we're de-risking real world trials. We have to do that because we don't have long left to take action. In doing that, we also de-risk the investment in those trials. So we reduce the risk of stranded assets and getting things wrong, and that's expensive. So by reducing that risk, we accelerate investment, and people will hopefully, as a consequence of transit, invest more quickly in the decarbonisation of transport, and they will have reduced risk of stranded assets, and they will be getting, therefore, a better return on their investment.
Excellent. So, of course, this is all vital to meeting the net zero targets for 2050. Who is involved on the TransiT Hub?
So the sponsors of the project are the Department for Transport, and the funder of the project is the EPSRC, which is the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council. There are 2 universities involved, Heriot-Watt and Glasgow University, and they collectively deliver a skill set to the project which covers transport, digital capabilities around transport, digital capabilities from the broader digital community, and the energy space. And the energy space is important because the energy that we put into the transport system has to be decarbonised and it has to be available. Together with those, the people who are going to do the work, we have a developing consortium or a stakeholder community, and that's everybody who uses transport or provides transport services. And just to be clear, every single person touches transport every day. We either use it to move around for mobility to get to work or get the kids to school or whatever it is, or we rely on it to deliver goods, either directly to us in the house or to the shops where we go shopping, using, by the way, transport to get to the shops. So it is ubiquitous. It touches everybody every single day. And that's why it's important. So we have to engage that stakeholder community, and we have to make sure that nobody's left out in this new transport system, because we are going to radically redesign the transport system.
Thank you. So I think that leads us nicely into our next question. How long has TransiT been running and what has been done so far?
So TransiT hasn't been running that long. That's the first thing to say. We started on the 1st of June, so we've been running now about 3 months. The project is organised into two halves. The first half is one of consultation, and we're halfway through that process. That lasts for 6 months. The second half is dependent on us submitting a proposal that goes through the normal quality assurance process to make sure that the money is being spent wisely and that we can deliver on our promises and that sort of thing. The second half lasts for 5 years, and that's the program of work. That's the piece of work where we develop digital twins, digital capabilities, digital models, digital shadows that allow us to accelerate the decarbonisation of transport.
So how will TransiT benefit the public?
Well, obviously, everybody touches and uses transport every single day. Yeah. So, and we're going to have to change the way that looks and feels. We know that because we've got to decarbonise. Okay. Transport is the biggest emitter of CO2 now, the biggest single emitter of CO2 worldwide. And in the UK, it's about a third of all emissions. So if you value mitigating climate change, and we all should, and so please let that be the case. But if we value decarbonisation, then that is an immediate value to the public. However, there are some second order benefits that will come through TransiT. By using digital capabilities, we will make sure that it delivers the needs against the needs of the public. So nobody is left behind. So groups of people that find transport difficult to access now, our ambition would be that they will be able to access decarbonised transport that is better. So everybody is going to get benefit from TransiT. And if we didn't do it, and this is perhaps another way to look at this, if we didn't do TransiT, the transition from where we are now with the public transport system as it is to something that we haven't designed and haven't discovered yet is going to be hazardous and difficult. So doing TransiT reduces that risk. It means that we're more likely to find the best solution for the future and more quickly, and it will be more investable in, and that benefits everybody.
It sounds like a very inclusive project, a diverse project, and one that involves communities from the start. Now, I know that we've been discussing with stakeholders for the last 3 months. Any early learnings that you could share with our stakeholder discussions?
Well, I think there are a couple of emergent themes. Actually, more than a couple. There's a few. The first one is that risk and uncertainty is a big barrier to decarbonisation. What do we mean by that? Well, risk and uncertainty makes it very hard to invest in new technologies. You run the risk of stranded assets. So this new phrase is starting to emerge, the race to be second. And there's a problem to be that. So you want to be second because somebody else has taken all the risk. And in a high risk environment, you are better off being second. The problem is that if everybody wants to be second, there is no first. And without anybody moving first, there can be no second. So in this paradox at the moment, nobody's moving. The pressure to move is getting higher. The cost of not doing anything now concentrates the future cost into a smaller window, making it more expensive. Right? So that's a big challenge that's emerging. Second sort of theme that's emerging from the consultation is that whilst we know the sort of technologies and the energy systems that might deliver decarbonisation, we understand those technically, they're not being adopted, and they're not being adopted because of human behaviour. So it's us, humans, paradoxically again, who are getting in the way of decarbonising transport and reducing the risk of climate change. So, but we would be the beneficiaries if indeed we achieve that. So that's a factor that's coming out. The last factor that's coming out is that efficiency matters. Right? The efficiency of the transition and the efficiency of the new solution that we have will matter. The efficiency of the transition matters because we want to do it in the shortest possible time, because transitions are expensive and that's where the uncertainty is. The efficiency of the ultimate solution matters because we will have constrained energy. We'll have constrained green energy. It will be in scarce supply. So the less we use of it, the easier the transition becomes. So efficiency matters. Because efficiency matters, then we are forced to think about developing new digital twins that optimize across a system of systems. So the transport system can be separated into systems such as road, rail, aviation, and maritime. And you could argue that you could optimize within them, or you could optimize the assets within those, the trains and the planes and the cars. But the new problem is, how do you optimize all of them at the same time? And we have to do that because everything is changing at the same time. The energy is changing, automation is changing, climate change is changing, the infrastructure is changing. Everything is changing at the same time. That's a new paradigm. How do you optimize complex adaptive systems that are not controllable? They are emergent. They're not deterministic like the system was before. We're on a ship, we're in a storm, and we think if we turn the wheel on the ship a particular way, the ship will go in a particular direction, but there is a danger that it'll get blown off course by the storm. So we constantly have to interact with the system, and the faster we interact with the system, the more likely it is that we can steer on the course that we intended. Now, digital twins do that. They take data from the real world, they put them into a clever computer model that does some fast processing and gives us feedback, tells us, look, it's going wrong, steer left or steer right. And you get that quickly, means you've got a chance of staying on the right course. So we need those new digital capabilities.
Okay, so in terms of the consultation for transit, what's next?
So far, we've had what we call discovery interviews. These are one-to-one interviews of about an hour's length, where we try to understand where stakeholders are in their decarbonisation journey, how well they understand the role of digital capabilities, and what their ecosystem looks like. Who else are they talking to about this problem? Who else are they coordinating their efforts with? So we've concluded that piece, more or less, and we've got good representation across all the modes of transport for both passenger and freight. So we feel we've got a reasonably good picture. What we're going to do next is we're going to take the emergent themes that have come out of those one-to-one discussions, and we're going to organise focus groups around them, so that people can discuss the detail of the emergent themes to get some sort of consensus. So it will be a process of solidifying what we've discovered so far, crystallizing it. The final phase is to have some workshops to answer the big questions. What are the decarbonisation challenges as perceived by all the modes, as perceived by passenger and freight stakeholders, but the energy companies, by the people who are building new equipment and manufacturers of that equipment. So those workshops are going to take place sort of October, November time, and that will really inform our proposal. So the whole purpose of this consultation is to make sure that our proposal is grounded in the real world issues around decarbonisation.
And you mentioned focus groups. When will they be happening?
The focus groups will start happening in September. So we're very close to those. In the next 2 or 3 weeks, we'll start having focus groups.
I wondered if you would like to add, what's your motivation? What got you interested, and how did you start?
So I think it's interesting to me that we started the work on decarbonising transport, freight transport in particular, about 10 years ago. And when we started those discussions, it was largely, if we're going to save energy, then that will save money. Yeah. So if we reduce the amount of diesel we burn, then that's going to cost us less. So that obviously this all makes economic sense and there's no barriers to it at all. So quite quickly we worked out that that was true for an awful lot of things. You could do an awful lot of things that were good return on investment, good payback periods. The challenge comes when you run out of those things and you haven't got down to zero. Yeah. Because there's a whole load of things, and this is where we are now, that cost us money. It's going to cost. Yeah. So the motivation now is really about two things. One, accessing investment, because people now need to spend money over a longer return on investment. And two, we need to do it as efficiently as possible. The pain of climate change mitigation, of decarbonising the transport system, has to be minimised because it is going to be painful. And that's the motivation for the TransiT project, is really by using digital, which is a low cost investment relative to real world trials that cost £500 million each time you do it. You can do a lot in the digital space for £250,000. So it makes sense to invest there first, reduce the risk in the future, reduce the risk of stranded assets, and accelerate the pace of decarbonisation. Because one of the things that we do know is that if we don't decarbonise, then there will be future costs associated with that, the consequences of adapting to climate change. And that's going to be expensive. So that will reduce the future returns on investment. Some people estimate the returns on investment in the future will be 40% less than what they are now because of climate change. So, if we don't do anything, we're not going to have economic growth and be wealthy again. But to do that, we're going to have to spend some money, and we're going to have to do that as efficiently as possible. And that's the motivation for TransiT for me, is how do we make that as painless as possible, as fast as possible, and as efficient as possible.
It's exciting stuff. Absolutely. So, okay, it remains to be said. So thank you, Phil, for your time today and discussing the TransiT project.
Tune in next time, folks, when we introduce the wider TransiT team and discuss the TransiT work packages and the emergent themes that come out of our upcoming focus groups. Thanks again for joining us.